For this course's film review, I'll be analyzing the French film Ridicule, produced in 1996. A brief summary of the film is that it takes place in the court of Louis XVI in 1783, and our protagonist is a lesser noble going to the court in an attempt to get an audience with the king to settle problems in his estate. The strengths of this film are the use of setting. The setting in Versailles is used very well. No shot looks stale, despite the fact it's done mostly at Versailles, and they do a good job of highlighting the different areas and the gardens and the different areas within Versailles. Next is language use. The choice to use French instead of English, despite the fact this film had international success, was very intelligent because descriptions of the court speech and the interactions with other people wouldn't have come across correctly if it was in English. For example, the conversation about English humor and trying to describe it in French, it wouldn't have hit in the correct way if it wasn't for the fact that the film was recorded in French. So next is the acting. The acting was really well done, especially when the actors are going back and forth with witty quips. It almost felt like Broadway in some cases, where there was a lot of passion in it, and it sounded like poetry and things like that, just going back and forth with these witty remarks towards one another, and that was really well done. And the next strength is the choice of the lead actor. The point of view was really well done because the actor, or the protagonist chosen, was intelligent enough to know Enlightenment ideals. He was a lesser noble, though, so while he could go to court, he didn't have enough power to not deal with the antics of the court, and that helps display the court of Louis XVI in a way that you don't want to destroy it, because he wants to participate in it and respects the king, but he also realizes the absurdity because he's from the country. The weaknesses, the limited setting. Paris wasn't shown once in the entire film. I think that's a weakness of it. The fact that some estates were shown, but it was mostly the inside. Only his estate was shown outside and was only shown for a bit. There wasn't really any description of any other cities other than the settlement around Versailles. There just was a very limited setting on display in the film. The depiction of the king was blatantly inaccurate. While he was not a powerful king, he was by no means unintelligent, and oftentimes in the film he came across as such. The underrepresentation of the queen was odd, because the queen was stated in our text to be very involved in court life, and she looked very removed from the court life we were experiencing in the film. And then there's a distinct lack of Enlightenment philosophers. Salons were oftentimes frequented by philosophers that had patrons in the nobility, and there was only one sort of philosopher throughout the film, but it was more just an indulger of philosophy more than anything else, instead of a person who was actually writing encyclopedias like we covered in class. And I think that that's a weakness in the film, because it doesn't correctly represent the amount of Enlightenment philosophers and the Enlightenment philosophy present in the court. The historical accuracy, the absurdity of the court is accurate. The fact that the court was so far removed from the suffering of the people of France, it is accurate. The fact that the king had absolute rule over everything that was approved or wasn't going to get approved was accurate. It was an absolute monarchy. Up until the Estates General was called, there was no check on the king at all. The importance of language is correct. The fact that you had to speak to the king in a certain way, we can see this in the grievances sent to the king from various places. So this is an accuracy of the film. The presence of salons and the fact that women headed them is accurate. Women oftentimes hosted salons and gain political power or power in the Enlightenment through that. The lack of a first estate is an inaccuracy. There really was only one depiction of a clergy member, and that was with the king during the philosophy speech about the rival of our protagonist, saying he could disprove God if the king wished. That was really the only depiction of clergy members. They held power, they held money, they would have been present at the court, maybe not drinking in salons, but they would have been present. The next is the presence of dueling, which is accurate. The Smithsonian says that France was the dueling capital of the world at this time, and it really didn't go out of popularity until the 1800s. The weapons used were also accurate. The accuracy of the pistols was correctly displayed, even if the actor is aiming more than one really needs to, because it's really just point and pull the trigger since they're so inaccurate, and it's a point blank encounter most of the time. Comparison to other works. In comparison to primary documents, there's not a mention of an account to the king by the finance minister Necker at all, and that would have been very much in the forefront of people's minds in 1783, since this came out in 1781, and the economic crisis was highlighted to everyone and was talked about in every circle, and the Enlightenment circles especially. So this was an accuracy, and thus the primary documents do a better job in this regard, although the film does bring to life a lot of things, and adds life into the court that can't really be displayed through a primary document, because those are typically limited to a third-person limited or a first-person point of view. The next is a comparison to When the King Took Flight, and the comparison here is the type of king in each one of them, and the king in Ridicule is not the same king in When the King Took Flight, and that's because it's way less accurate than When the King Took Flight. When the King Took Flight does a way better job of describing the king and telling his mindset, his philosophy, and the way he was governing and things like that than Ridicule does. Compared to the documentary Inside the Chateau of Versailles, it was way better. The documentary was dry, this was lively, and while you didn't get to see all the intricacies or things that were built by Louis XIV, and that's where the documentary shined in those regards, the place looked more alive with the actors in it than it did in the actors used in the documentary. And in comparison to lecture, some parts about Versailles and some parts about the court life are better shown through film than they are through their PowerPoints, and I think this is one of those, although lecture, of course, hammers home some of the more intricacies better than a film that's meant to have box office success. In conclusion, Ridicule is an excellently well done film, and it was a pleasure to watch, even though it was all in French, and I highly suggest its repeated use in the course.